April 5, 1945. The Italian mountains near Viareggio. A young black lieutenant stands at the base of a fortress that has broken 3 American assaults. Castle Aghinolfi, a medieval stronghold turned into a German death trap. His company has 70% inexperienced replacements. His white commanding officer doesn't believe they can take it. But First Lieutenant Vernon Baker is about to prove him wrong. By the end of this day, Baker will kill at least 9 German soldiers with his own hands. He will destroy 3 machine gun nests, an observation post, and a bunker. 19 of his 25 men will be dead or wounded, and it will take 52 years for America to recognize what he did. This is the story of the first African American to receive the Medal of Honor for World War II. A story of extraordinary courage, systematic racism, and justice delayed but not denied. To understand this story, we need to understand the man and the world he fought in. Vernon Joseph Baker was born December 17, 1919, in Cheyenne, Wyoming. By the age of 4, both his parents were dead. Vernon and his 2 sisters were raised by their grandparents in poverty. As a young black man in 1930s Wyoming, Baker's options were limited. He worked odd jobs, he struggled, he dreamed of something more. In 1941, at age 21, Baker walked into an Army recruiting office. The recruiter looked at him and said, "We don't have any quotas for you people." Most men would have walked away. Baker came back a few weeks later, a different recruiter, a different day. This time he was accepted. Baker wanted to be a quartermaster. The Army made him infantry. It didn't matter. Vernon Baker was finally a soldier. But he was a soldier in a segregated army. An army where black soldiers were commanded by white officers. An army where many believed black men couldn't fight. An army where heroism, no matter how extraordinary, might never be recognized. Baker completed basic training at Camp Walters, Texas. He excelled. He was smart, disciplined, and a natural leader. In January 1943, he was commissioned as a second lieutenant, one of only a handful of black officers in the entire United States Army. He was assigned to the 371st Infantry Regiment, 92nd Infantry Division, the Buffalo Soldiers, a proud segregated unit with a history dating back to the Civil War. In June 1944, the 371st Infantry landed in Naples, Italy. Their mission was to push north through the Italian mountains, breaking through the Gothic Line, the Germans' last major defensive position in Italy. It was brutal, grinding warfare, mountain combat, cold, mud, German machine guns hidden in ancient stone fortifications. In October 1944, just months after arriving, Baker was leading a night patrol when everything went wrong. His squad was trying to take a house on a hillside. They lost 3 men immediately. Then Baker was hit, seriously wounded in the arm. He spent 2 months in the hospital in Pisa. When he returned to his unit in December, he was the highest-ranking officer left. His men trusted him, respected him, followed him. Then in March 1945, 3 white officers arrived, including Captain John Runyon. Suddenly, Baker, despite his experience, was taking orders from men who had never seen combat. On April 5, 1945, Company C received their orders. Assault Castle Aghinolfi. The castle sat atop a mountain overlooking the coastal highway and the approaches to La Spezia, a critical Italian port. German artillery observers in the castle could call down fire on any American movement below. The castle was surrounded by machine gun nests, bunkers, minefields, and mortar positions. 3 previous American assaults had ended in disaster. Hundreds of casualties, no ground gained. Now it was the 370th turn. Baker's weapons platoon would lead the attack. 25 men, most of them replacements with no combat experience. They moved out at 5 in the morning, cold, dark, silent. Baker didn't wear his helmet. It impaired his hearing, and he needed to hear everything. He carried his M1 Garand rifle and several grenades. Moving faster than the rest of the company, Baker and his men reached a position about 250 yards from the castle within 2 hours. That's when Baker's extraordinary skill as a soldier took over. Scouting ahead for a machine gun position, he spotted something unusual. 2 cylindrical objects sticking out of a slit in the ground. German observation scopes. Without hesitation, Baker shoved his rifle into the opening and fired. Both German artillery spotters died instantly. He moved forward, spotted a camouflage machine gun nest. The German crew was eating breakfast, completely unaware. Baker killed both of them before they could react. He continued up the mountain, eliminating enemy positions with deadly precision. Then Captain Runyon appeared. Runyon had been following behind Baker's advance, letting the black lieutenant do the dangerous work. As they stood together, a German grenade came flying out of nowhere. It hit Runyon's helmet with a metallic clang. Runyon panicked and ran. Baker calmly killed the German soldier who threw it. Then he picked up the grenade. It was a dud. He continued forward, destroying a German bunker with his own grenades and cutting a telephone wire, connecting the German positions to their headquarters. By now, the Germans had figured out the Americans were coming. Mortar rounds began falling. Machine gun fire erupted from multiple positions. Baker's men started taking casualties. He called for artillery support on the German positions. His request was denied. Command couldn't believe anyone had gotten that close to the castle. Baker found Runyon and asked for orders. Runyon told him he was pulling back and would send reinforcements. He lied. When Runyon reached American lines, he reported that Baker's platoon had been wiped out. Left for dead, Baker and his remaining men continued fighting. He personally killed at least 9 German soldiers that day. He destroyed 3 machine gun nests, an observation post, and a bunker. He provided covering fire as his men, 19 of them now dead or wounded, withdrew down the mountain. Out of 25 men, only 6 made it back alive and unwounded. The next night, Baker volunteered to lead another assault, this time with men from the 473rd Infantry. They advanced through minefields and heavy fire. When they finally reached Castle Aghinolfi, the Germans had abandoned it. The fortress that had withstood 3 previous assaults had fallen. The Gothic line was broken. On July 4, 1945, in a ceremony in Viareggio, Vernon Baker was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest military decoration. It was a segregated ceremony. White officers who received lesser medals stood in the places of honor. Baker stood to the side. His commanding officer, Captain Runyon, had recommended him for the Medal of Honor, but the paperwork was never forwarded to Washington. Baker was never told. Of the 432 Medals of Honor awarded during World War II, not a single one went to a black soldier. Not one. This was not an accident. This was systematic racism embedded in the military's award system. Black soldiers were considered inferior by many white commanders. Their heroism was ignored, downplayed, or deliberately suppressed. Studies after the war showed a clear pattern of discrimination. Black soldiers received Distinguished Service Crosses for actions that would have earned white soldiers the Medal of Honor. But for decades, no one did anything about it. Baker stayed in the Army. He fought in Korea, commanding an all-white airborne company after the military was desegregated. He retired in 1968 after 27 years of service. For more than 20 years after that, he worked for the American Red Cross, counseling military families. He never complained. He never demanded recognition. He had done his duty. That was enough, but others hadn't forgotten. In the early 1990s, as America commemorated the 50th anniversary of World War II, black historians and veterans began asking uncomfortable questions. Why were there no Black Medal of Honor recipients from World War II? In 1993, the Army commissioned a study. The findings were damning. 7 African-American soldiers had earned the Medal of Honor through their actions in World War II. 7 men whose heroism had been deliberately denied because of the color of their skin. Sergeant Reuben Rivers, Staff Sergeant Edward Carter Jr., Lieutenant Charles Thomas, Private First Class Willie James, Private George Watson, Lieutenant John Fox, and First Lieutenant Vernon Baker. On January 13, 1997, President Bill Clinton held a ceremony at the White House. For the first time in history, the Medal of Honor was awarded to African-American soldiers for their service in World War II. Of the 7 recipients, only 1 was still alive to receive it. Vernon Baker, now 77 years old, stood in the White House as the president placed the Medal of Honor around his neck. He wept, not for himself, but for the 6 men who weren't there with him. His words were simple, humble, and heartbreaking. The only thing I can say to those that are not here with me is, thank you, fellas. Well done, he continued. I was an angry young man. We were all angry. But we had a job to do, and we did it. My personal thoughts were that I knew things would get better, and I'm glad to say that I'm here to see it. Vernon Baker lived to see his country finally recognize what he had done. He lived to see a black president elected. He lived to see the barriers he fought against begin to crumble. Baker died on July 13, 2010, at the age of 90. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His grave marker reads, First Lieutenant, United States Army, World War II, Korea, Medal of Honor. But his legacy is so much more than that. Vernon Baker's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. For decades, America asked black men to fight and die for a country that refused to treat them as equals. They fought on two fronts, against the enemy abroad and against racism at home. Baker and the other 6 Black Medal of Honor recipients from World War II were heroes twice over. They had the courage to fight when their country called, and they had the dignity to serve with honor, even when that honor was denied to them. Today, we remember Vernon Baker not just as a soldier, but as a man who embodied the best of what America could be. Brave, selfless, forgiving. A man who, when given the chance to be bitter, chose instead to be grateful that he lived to see justice done. His story reminds us that the fight for equality is long and hard, that recognition delayed is not the same as recognition denied, and that sometimes the greatest heroes are those who never demanded to be called heroes at all. On April 5, 1945, a young black lieutenant climbed a mountain in Italy and single-handedly changed the course of a battle. It took 52 years for his country to say thank you. But when they finally did, Vernon Baker stood tall. Not for himself, but for all the black soldiers who fought, bled, and died without recognition. That is the true story of Vernon Baker. If you found this story meaningful, please share it. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. And if your family has stories of service, sacrifice, or the fight for equality, share them in the comments. These are the stories that define who we are as a nation. Thank you for watching.